And we are live. So, Mr. Fenichel, for the audience that does not know you, please feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay, it's actually Fenichel. Most people get that wrong. So the CH is like an SH sound, which is a little hard to say. But yeah, so my name is Jay Fenichel. I'm a drummer, educator. I started playing when I was 8 years old. I went to school for music, SUNY Purchase College in upstate New York. And I've been doing nothing but, playing and teaching and being a professional musician since I graduated in 98. So we're coming up on 30 years of teaching and playing and doing all that. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now.
Well, okay. So I found you on Instagram through your reels, and you have a very massive following on both Instagram and YouTube. I don't know about TikTok. I haven't seen your TikTok, but on YouTube and Instagram, you each have 100,000 followers. So, well, number one, where did you start when it became to becoming a drummer? Right? Like, where did you learn this? Why'd you do it? And how is it that it's come so far?
I started playing drums by accident. Actually, it was a funny story. When I was around 8, you go to pick a band instrument when you go into school. I don't know if you've done that. If you played band, do you play an instrument yourself?
I do not play an instrument, but I know exactly what you're talking about. How through middle school you have to basically, except for 8th grade, you have to have an instrument. But yeah,
that's it. So I wanted to play clarinet because my older sister was a clarinet player, and I wanted to be like her. But when I was in line for choosing an instrument, there was a person about 3 people ahead of me that was picking clarinet. She was trying to blow in the mouthpiece. He had all the mouthpieces set in front of him, and she tried to blow in and she couldn't make a sound. And then he ended up picking an instrument for her, like violin or tuba or trombone or something else. And I knew I couldn't make a sound out of it. So I quickly switched it to drums because I didn't have to blow into anything. And that's how I became a drummer. So I ended up getting it. And from that, I just fell in love with it. And, in elementary school and into high school. And I started taking private lessons. And then I went to school for jazz. And yeah, so drums it became my, my passion and my love, So that's kind of where it came from.
Right. So one thing I will say is that did you have the recorder in 4th grade?
I did. We did do that.
Yeah, because
yes, I had it.
So where were you raised? Where were you born and raised?
Long Island, New York. So in Levittown, which is about Nassau County, about 45 minutes, 50 minutes to New York City. So pretty much New York City was my hang growing up,
Right, because I'm in Jersey. So
okay,
we're in Jersey, Ridgewood. So I'm about the same distance from New York.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, but I was gonna say, in my experience in middle school, I had a terrible teacher for band.
Oh, yeah?
Like, as in I played the trumpet in middle school. If you asked me to play the trumpet now, I probably couldn't even remotely tell you how. But no, it's just funny because to put you in perspective of how strict of a teacher he was, he showed us a video of people playing at the Taj Mahal. Right. And then he goes, you guys have these instruments. You guys are playing with the same equipment that they are. So why aren't you playing as well as them? And, any normal person will look at that and go, there's something wrong with this guy. But he stayed there for a pretty long time, enough to where he was teaching before and a little bit after me. I don't think he teaches there now. But he was not a good teacher, as you can probably tell.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky in that regard. I had a lot of great teachers growing up. I don't really remember my elementary school band teacher. I think his name was Mr. Otto, if I remember. But it was really high school, like junior high and high school. Nick Tarantola, Mr. Tarantola, Mr. T, everyone called him. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was just such a phenomenal teacher. And his passion for music. You ever see the movie Mr. Holland's Opus? Have you ever seen that movie with Richard Dreyfuss?
No, I have not.
You're young. So it's a great movie about a music teacher, a high school music teacher, basically, who's trying to write this giant score. He's been writing it since he's in his 20s, but he needs to get a job as a teacher just to pay the bills. And he never has time to finish his opus that he's writing, and it ends up following his whole career as a high school teacher, basically. But that movie, I mean, this guy that he reminded me so much of the actor from Mr. Holland's Opus, because he just inspired so many, especially guys in my grade. My older sister is also a musician. She's a music teacher. She went to Crane School, which is up in SUNY Potsdam. So she's in district. She teaches, middle school or elementary and all that kind of stuff, choir and band and all that. And my dad's a piano player, but he was a math teacher. He's not a pro. He's just like, he just loves to play. So I have music in my family, but yeah, I just fell in love with drums, and that teacher in particular, he definitely inspired me. But for our drum line in high school, we had, Jerry Noble, Mr. Noble. He would throw sticks at our head. So when we made mistakes or we were talking out or doing something that we weren't supposed to be doing, a stick would just come whizzing by our head. So I hear you with the crazy teachers.
But it's always music teachers, I notice.
Yeah, well,
I don't know. I've never, the only even similar teacher would probably be my middle school math teacher. Middle school has a lot of strange teachers, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But regardless, have you seen the movie Whiplash?
Of course, sure.
What do you think of the movie?
It was a great movie. I mean, it's not really super based in reality in terms of like learning drums. But I mean, I understand for dramatic effect what they were trying to do. Have you ever seen those YouTube videos where like they'll have a pro come in, they'll have like a shark expert who look at Jaws and tell you all the things that are wrong with Jaws, or Deep Blue Sea, or any one of those like shark movies, and say, okay, here's where the Hollywood got it wrong. There was actually one of my favorite drummers. Who was it that was doing one of those? He did one on Whiplash as a pro drummer, looking at Whiplash. He did a great job breaking it down. And I'm forgetting who it was. Oh man, trying to remember who it was. It's going back a couple of years, but I mean that's the challenge with Whiplash. It's a movie. At the end of the day, it's a movie. But that being said, we've all had teachers that were like that. Maybe not quite as abusive as that, but I remember my first teacher in college was my version of that. He was a private teacher, so it wasn't like for big band class. It was just one-on-one. But yeah, I mean, my very first lesson with him, he asked me to play, play for me, do a little trading back and forth. Let me hear you play. And I started playing and I started soloing. I thought I was going to wow him with my chops. And after I got done, I looked at him and he says to me, "Don't you ever do any of that ever again," in this low, angry voice. And I was terrified. I was like 18. How old are you? You look like you're a young guy.
17. I'm 17.
Yeah. So I imagined like a teacher, a guy who's pretty famous. And he first of all, he cursed at me, and I was like, he said the F word. I was like, oh, I was like, I never had a teacher do that. Yeah. And he was like, "Don't ever do any of that again." And I was like, "What did I do?" He's like, "Everything. Everything about that was bad. You probably are not going to make it as a pro drummer." And then for the next 3 years, it was like I dreaded going to every single lesson. I learned a lot though. He was a tough teacher, like Fletcher, but not abusive like that. I wasn't, I didn't feel like I was going to die every time I came in there, but I did call home crying a couple of times saying, "I don't think I could be a drummer. I don't think I could do this for real." But sometimes those things, if they don't break you, they take you forward. But as far as like the playing stuff, I mean, they're painting that last solo in Whiplash as being like this next level, high level thing. And it's cool. I mean, they did a great job, but I mean, there's nothing about it that's so crazy from a drumming standpoint. But they, in the movie, they present it like it's this insane level drum solo, but I do love the movie. I am a fan.
Well, one thing I will say about the movie, I watched different breakdowns of the film because I've never watched the full thing, but I do like the scenes that I have seen.
Yeah.
Right. But I think people kind of find it funny though, in a way, like not like a funny, like as in like it's a comedy, but when you see this guy that's going to such an extreme, the scene I'm talking about in the beginning where, I don't know what the main character, whoever his name is,
Fletcher or the Miles Teller character.
The drummer.
I don't remember his character's name. Miles Teller is the actor, and I don't remember the drummer's name. But we'll say Miles for argument's sake.
Well, right. So Miles Teller, he opens up to Fletch for a little bit. He's like, "Oh, my dad." I don't know if it was his dad left him or his mom left him, and then and then Fletch is like, "All right, it's okay. We're gonna do this," like as if it's gonna be super calm.
Right.
And then he just goes in and starts berating him
Yeah.
But and it's obviously supposed to be a movie about obsession and what it means to really be like the top level artist in anybody's field, like the level of dedication it takes,
Yeah.
right? And the extremity of it.
Right. Yeah, and that it's true, and there are teachers like that. I mean, like I said, I don't know if there's any to that level of abuse. I mean, I certainly had college professors, but honestly, where I am now, on the other side of that, being one at the level of those teachers now, you know, it comes from a place of insecurity when you have a guy like that is like projecting that on the students. You know, I understand that he's trying to push them, but pushing them through that negative reinforcement is not the best way to get something out of a musician, in my opinion. You know, I don't teach like that. I'm not like that at all. But I don't think it's effective. I mean, it's almost like taking the attitude of like a coach from a sports team, how like they'll be very tough on their team. If someone messes up, they yell and scream like a drill sergeant. Music's not like that. Music's not about yelling and screaming. You're going to get guys that are like that. I mean, I certainly had another teacher in my rep class who was an old school bass player, you know, and he toured with like some great cats, but he always had stuff to say. I mean, he would always yelling at you, telling you to get up the kit, you're playing wrong, you're not doing it right, and screaming at you, throwing stuff at you. But as I got better and I got older, like I said, it kind of came from a place of insecurity on his point, because he was good at what he was good at, but outside of that box, he couldn't really hang with any other kind of styles of music, you know. So he was great at the straight ahead jazz, but you take him out of that, and he was a mess. He would turn the beat around. He'd make mistakes. He'd do all the things that he yelled at us about if you were playing on a gig with him and you're at his level. So I feel like once I got to that level where I was able to play gigs with that guy, and I noticed the stuff that he was doing wrong, it like dawned on me that he's projecting that on the students. It's like all the stuff that he feels insecure about himself as a player, he's screaming at the kids not to do. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. I think Whiplash there's an undertone of that in there, you know? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you actually watch the movie, somebody made a very, very interesting point. I think it was like one of those YouTube shorts where he's like, "Did you know that in the movie Whiplash?" And you know, I'm talking about those videos. Yeah. So there was one video where he goes and he says that Miles Teller, air quotes, because I don't know the guy's name, but when he's doing the drums, right?
Right.
And Fletch, aka J.K. Simmons, is saying, he's like, "You're off beat," right? Like, you know, apparently he's actually perfectly on beat.
Yes.
So he's perfectly on beat, which means that Fletch was basically playing like a game with him.
Yeah.
Like, you're all
getting his head. Yeah, he was trying to get in his head.
But he was perfectly on beat though.
Right.
And he would complain when he was on beat.
Yeah.
Which is a very, I don't know, that's like next level, trying to get under somebody's skin and in somebody's head.
Right. So it's the idea, and there are teachers that teach like that. It's the idea of teaching through, you know, you got to do better. You got to do better. You got to be better than that. You got to be perfect. And does it work? I mean, I guess if you have that, I've had teachers that were tough like that. And yeah, it's going to work on some students. Other students are going to shut down. But a teacher like that is kind of coming from the frame of, if you can't hang with this and you quit, then, you know, we found that out, and you should be doing something else. You shouldn't be a pro musician, you know. And that's kind of where Fletcher's point was. Like, he was trying to get him to quit, you know. So again, very little similar to some stuff that I went through in college. By the way, Andrew, his name was Andrew. The guy, Andrew Neiman was the character's name in Whiplash, the drummer. Anyways, yeah. So when I went to audition for college, I had a lot of things about my playing that were bad. I was your age, you know. I was a kid. I was playing for about 10 years already, because I started when I was around 7 or 8. But I didn't really know my stuff like I know it now, you know. But I had a miracle audition. I went into this audition and I had really good chops, but I didn't know where I was. And I remember sitting there with the teachers, and they're all sitting there, and I was auditioning at Purchase. It was a new department at the time. There's only 75 students in the jazz department. So they weren't taking many new freshmen. They were only accepting 3 freshmen, and they made it clear to me they didn't need any drummers. They're like, "We don't need a drummer. We want trombone and bass. That's what we need. So we will let you audition, but we're not going to take you," basically is what they said to me. So in the audition, I was going through it, but I could tell all these teachers were not impressed by anything I was doing. They were just like sitting there getting through the audition. So at the last thing, again, I had the bass player and we were playing some time, and they're like, just play some time and then do some solos back and forth. Time, solo, time, solo, time, solo, kind of like that. The first round of solo I did, I was very conservative. The second round, same thing. I didn't want to mess up. But the third round, I looked over at the teachers and they were bored. They were like, I'm not going to get in. So for the third round, I closed my eyes and I just threw out every furious, crazy, insane lick that I knew, but I didn't know where I was. I had no idea where I was. I was just flying as fast as I could. Like think of Miles Teller at the end of Whiplash, where he's going crazy. Except he knows where he is, and I had no idea where I was. And I don't know what it was, like an angel on my shoulder, but by the grace of God, I just came around and boom, I hit that cymbal right with the bass player, and we were back into the time. And the three of them jumped out of their seats. And they're like, oh my God. They thought I was messing with them. They thought the first two rounds, oh, he's being all conservative. And then I was building it up to this crazy solo in the third round. So they were super impressed by my musicianship. And it was a total luck shot, but they came in, they're like, we don't need drummers, but you're like a prodigy. We're going to accept you. We're going to give you money. We're going to all this kind of stuff. So I was like, my ego was exploding. Challenge is when I actually got accepted and I got into school and I went down to that first rep class, they expected me to duplicate that. And because it was a luck shot, I would do those things. I'd come out and it'd be in the wrong spot. And they'd be like, wait, that wasn't right. And it was so very quickly, all those teachers wanted me out. They wanted me to quit, but they couldn't fail me because I wasn't failing my classes. I was smart. So I was getting good grades. But they want to kick me out. So one way of kicking me out, I can't be sure, but I think they went to my private teacher and they said, get him to quit. Do whatever you got to do to get him to quit. And that's kind of coming back to what we're talking about. Sometimes that's in the competitive world in college and stuff. They'll stuff like that does happen. Not to that level, though. I mean, I think he gets in a car accident. Doesn't he get like a car accident at the end and almost dies?
Yeah, he does. And the idea is that, because throughout the movie, there's like these little subtle hints that Fletch is so extreme,
right,
that it, there's like hints that like a student of his committed suicide because he couldn't handle the pressure. And then, Miles Teller gets into a car crash and he can barely make it. Right. And then Fletch is like, oh, I don't know why you were late. He's still mad at him, even though he knows he got into a car crash.
Sure.
Right. Which is obviously something that nobody should ever do.
Right.
But
he was like a psycho. He was an obvious narcissist, psychopath, which is why it's so satisfying at the end when Miles Teller just starts Caravan without his permission, just starts the song and starts doing the solo. And when he comes over and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'll cue you. It's like, that's super taken over. I mean, you get a lot of trouble if you actually did that to a band leader, especially a guy like that. But I guess at the end of the movie, he felt like he had nothing left because, he sets him up at the end. He sets him up and puts him in that situation where he doesn't know the tune. And it's like, then he makes him play and he knows he's going to fall over himself. And he's like, if you mess up on this gig, forget your whole career because the people in the audience are going to, they're up guys in the industry and they'll know who you are. They'll remember you. So he totally set him up to fail. So it was done well as far as the story and as far as the drama, who's the actor that plays Fletcher? What's his name?
J.K. Simmons. J.K.
Simmons, right? Yeah, he was awesome. I was scared of him. I was watching him getting flashbacks of college, but yeah. And some of the other stuff as far as the playing, your hands bleeding, things like that shouldn't happen. Those kind of things are a little exaggerated, but
Well, one thing I will ask about is, and now that you're mentioning this, is about teachers as a whole. So your career is basically teaching people to play the drums now, right? On YouTube and actually, funnily enough, I signed up for the original Google Meet through your website too. So, you're teaching people to play the drums.
Right.
Right. So what advice would you give to people that want to get involved in playing the drums?
I mean, drums like anything else, it's a study. You got to sit there, you got to work at it. There's a lot of work. There's a reason why not everybody is a great drummer, just like on anything. If you want to get good at it, you got to put in the time, you got to put in the work. There's really no shortcuts. Getting a teacher is the best thing you can do. I was a player for a long time where I just pretty much made my main living as a player, through my 20s. And, I did the touring thing. I played with some rock bands, and we tried to get the record deal and do all that. But I kind of fell back into teaching when I had my twins. I have twin daughters that are 7 now. But the internet has allowed me to kind of reach the world without having to go out on tour and do clinics and do, stuff like that. And I kind of leaned into education. A lot of people are afraid to jump into a career in music because they're afraid they can't make a living at it. Does that make sense? Like, it's hard, like anything. But there's room if you are creative and you really, try to think about it from a business place. If your goal is not to teach, it might be to play. There's tons of places, especially with the internet, where you can make a living and you could make it your main thing. But you gotta be willing to do the work, and the work is hard. It's one of those things that's tough to do. What do you do besides? I mean, I know you're doing the podcast thing, so you're a young guy. What is your thing that you want to do?
Well, in terms of like a career, I mean, like maybe the podcast, I'm going to be honest.
Sure.
Cause I'm already interviewing people. It's funny. And I say this a million times, so I'm not going to bore everybody that continues to watch my podcast with this story over and over again, but I'm now interviewing, or at least I have been interviewing people that like I've been a fan of in some cases for years. Right. Like, and it's a cool feeling, right? When you're getting to go to I was just down in Hoboken actually, and a couple months ago, and I was with a YouTuber that I had been a fan of for about a year or so, who gets like 47 million views on his videos, and he's like, he responded to a message, and he's like, sure, come down to Hoboken, let's do something. And it's like my only video in-person interview that I've done, but it's and it's awesome. It's an awesome feeling. But with that being said, it's like I do like getting to interview people.
Oh yeah, that's great. And listen, this is great. This is great that you're doing this. You're starting out, but you're going to notice that this is a lot of work too. It's a lot of work getting this going. It's a lot of work, but you just got to keep on pushing at it, and you're doing the right thing. I remember when I started social media, I'm Gen X, so internet was not my thing. I was not into social media. I didn't have a Facebook. I had a YouTube, but I didn't really follow it. I didn't have Instagram. I certainly didn't have TikTok. It was one of my students that got me into social media. A student of mine said, Jay, how come you're not doing videos? Like the guys in Drumeo and all these guys are doing videos. You should be doing videos. And I'm like, I don't like any of that social media nonsense. It's not really my generation. I'm old school. It's not what I do. And he kind of, through an argument, about an hour argument, he was able to kind of turn my thinking around on it. And he's like, you should check out this guy. And he pointed me to like an internet guru who's like teaches social media. And he's like, just read his book, or just check out his, follow him on YouTube and watch some of his videos. So I did that, and it really started changing my thinking. I was like, wow, I could really reach people if I do this. I had just moved to Georgia, to Atlanta, from New York to Atlanta. And I was watching Rick Beato. Do you know who Rick Beato is on YouTube?
I feel like I've heard the name before, but generally no.
He's an older guy. He's got white hair, and he interviews a lot. He does a lot of very breakdowns of famous songs. He became a very big YouTuber. Okay. So yeah, I mean, he's got like 3 or 4 million subscribers now. He's big on Instagram and great guitar player, producer. So I was following him, and he was interviewing one of my favorite drummers, who's Fenichel, is one of my favorite all-time drummers of all time. And he did such an amazing interview with Vinny, and it's exactly what you're doing here. Like he just, he was friends with Vinny, or he called him, and they did this awesome interview. And then in the interview, he said something about being in Georgia. So I looked it up, and I found out that he was literally like the town over from where I just moved. So I went on his Twitter, and I just messaged him. And I'm like, hey, Rick, I'm a drummer from New York. I just moved down. I just saw your Fenichel video. I know I'm a nobody, but I'd love to have a call with you, maybe take you out to coffee or something, because I just wanted to find out what he was doing with social media. What he was doing was working. And he called me. He called me back, and we had like an hour conversation. I was like surreal, talking to him. And he gave me a lot of great advice just about exactly what's happening here. He just said, listen, you just got to keep doing it. It's a tough road. You just got to push at it. He's like, the first year I did it, I did one long form video every day. So by the end of the year, I had 365 long form videos on YouTube, and I grew my account to like 300,000 or 400,000 subscribers in a year. which is insane, that he did all that work. And now it's like, and I said, do you play? Do you produce? He's like, no, I'm a YouTuber. It's what I am right now. He's like, I went from a musician, producer, songwriter to a full-time YouTuber. It's what I do. So it's a viable career. I mean, you could absolutely 100% do that. I mean, the level that I'm at now, I have to turn down so many sponsorships and things like that. Every day I have 20 different people in my inbox. They want me to review products. Most of them have nothing to do with drums. Here, check out this vacuum. We have a coffee maker. We have a sandwich press. And they want to send me all this stuff, but I don't want any of that stuff. It's like, it's not really relevant to what I'm doing. But, so that's what I mean. You start doing it and there's room. There's definitely room for it to happen. How long have you been doing this now, the podcast?
Well, I always tell people that if you go to my first video, right, it's going to be about October 2022, late 2022.
Sure.
Right. So it's going to be very long time. It's going to be a decently long amount of time ago. But then I didn't really start. And then my next video after that's like 5 months after that.
Right.
And then after that, it's like 3 months after that. And then the video after that's like a month. And then after that, it's like a week, sometimes 5 a week, but so I didn't really get started until I'm going to say a little less than a year ago.
Gotcha. Okay. But that's good. I mean, the consistency is the key. I need to get back into long form. I started with long form YouTubes and I started putting them out again before I was really into everything, more for trying to get people into a website. I was trying to get students basically that way. So I wasn't really pushing it consistently. And it took me a long time to make a video. When I first started, it was like 2015 or 2016. That's when I first started with video production, not social media, but just making videos. Because I was selling courses and I was doing physical DVDs and things like that. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to make a video. I didn't know how to shoot a video. I didn't know nothing about lights. I knew nothing about cameras. And even sound. I wasn't even great about incorporating sound. So I would just put a mic in front of the drums and play. And some of those early videos just sound horrible. They're a mess, But I got a call from Vic Firth Drumsticks, the guys that make these sticks. And they were trying to build up their YouTube channel and I was an endorser of theirs. So they're like, would you mind doing some videos for us? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. I'll do some video lessons for you. So I was making content for them and I would spend hours on the videos because I didn't know what I was doing. And I just gave it to Vic Firth. I just gave them like 30 lessons. So each lesson probably took me about 3 or 4 days to produce and edit and put together. And then I just gave them away. And it built up Vic Firth's YouTube channel. They have they ended up getting hundreds of thousands of subscribers. I got nothing. I was thinking I'm just helping the company I endorse with making content. I didn't see the value in it. You see what I mean? So to this day, if you go on YouTube and search my name, it goes right to Vic Firth. It doesn't go to my stuff. It goes to Vic Firth stuff. So they kind of hijacked my SEO a little bit. But yeah, that's a lesson I learned. So, definitely don't do that. If someone calls you and says, hey, just give us content for free, don't shortchange yourself that way. But anyways, but you're on the right track. I mean, the consistency, that's what I learned from Rick. Rick was like, listen, you got to keep doing it. And that's the biggest thing, being consistent, So do you do any other content besides the podcast or is it just the podcast is your main thing?
Well, I have tried, I've thought about it. Right. Okay. But the problem is what? Right. Because think about it like this, right? My content is, I'm talking to somebody that does a thing, right? And it's literally everywhere. So, sometimes the first guy I had on was the biggest self-improvement YouTuber on YouTube. And I always tell this story. Shoot him an email 5 minutes later, he responds. First episode comes out. He's 3.41 million subscribers. So big following, one of the biggest self-improvement guys on YouTube. And then the second guy is more of a psychology philosophy type of YouTuber called Analyzing Evil, 721,000 subscribers. Then it's a former member of SEAL Team 6. Right. Then it's a judge, like a judge that did political cases and stuff like that. Then after, and it goes on and on to drastically different people.
Yeah.
So, but to my point though, or to your point with what do I want to do else in terms of content? I've thought about it, between just fun stuff where it's figuring out if you can use fireworks to like blow something up like in a microwave, right? Like kind of the opposite of what I'm doing now. Instead of just a calm conversation, like, oh, I wonder if I got a bunch of crackers and I stuck it in a microwave, like what would happen? Like that sort of stuff. But then on the other hand, I've also thought about like making, Max Fosh.
No, I don't know.
He like just think like, you know who Mr. Beast is. I'll say that. Do you know who Mr. Beast is? Think like that, but almost like for experiments. Like let's see if like he can do like he'll prank people, but in ways that are absurd, right? Like he'll get married to someone and then divorce them in like 3 minutes, like to try and break the world record for world's shortest marriage, like that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
But I've considered that, or talking to the camera type of videos where I'm just saying like advice or self or how to, like not how to, but just advice.
Right.
So yeah, those would be the main things that I'd probably do.
Okay. And finding something that you're good at and then just, putting it together, even doing what you're doing now. I mean, believe it or not, you could take what you're doing now with the podcast and the fact that you're interviewing and doing this kind of thing. You could teach other people how to set something like this up, especially once you get it successful in doing that. You could give tips on your podcast, so you're already doing the research. You're already kind of in there and doing that. My head is already going to all those places with the internet. Because like I said, for my generation, it's not something I grew up with and it's not something I was super comfortable with. And I've learned so much doing what I'm doing. And I have friends of mine calling me up all the time. Like, Jay, can you show me how to do this? Can you show me what you're doing? Can you show me, how do I build a following like that? How do I, get students from a YouTube channel? How do I, and there's value in that. So you could turn around and, take what you've learned doing this and teach other people how to do it. And there's value there. And then there's crazy guys, like you said, the Mr. Beasts that do crazy experiments. They do, those are good for like fast views. But I mean, if you want to build a following, like I'm niche down to drums. So my following is not 3 million people, but it's 100,000 drummers. The guys that follow me on YouTube, I know they're drummers. TikTok, that's a little, the audience isn't quite as sophisticated on TikTok as they are on YouTube and Instagram. But yeah, so I mean, having a thing and then offering some kind of value and being consistent. Those are the main things that I learned, from doing this kind of thing. But yeah, man, I think you're doing great. You're on the right track. I think it's awesome. Plus you're a young guy. I have a 17-year-old nephew and I'd love to see him doing stuff like this. He wants to be a media mogul. He wants to start his a clothing line and be a media mogul. I'm like, well, but you got to do something to do that. You can't just like wish it happening,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just like doing this, at the end of the day. So, I mean, at one point I do want to get a studio, which I think would be a lot of fun because I'll say this. I like having a conversation in person when I'm face to face with the person. Maybe we could do something afterwards, like get lunch or dinner.
Right.
This is a little bit, like almost like a phone call, right? Where it feels less personal in a way, right? I'm still having good conversations, but it's just not the same, right? Yeah. It's not the same as when you're talking to the person in real life and you're like, I met that person, but it's still cool, but it's just different, when you're meeting someone or doing the recording in person, especially when the person has high quality equipment too. Because when you're just like listening and you just hear that person, it's a very cool feeling. But with regards to what advice, right? And what advice would you give to teachers, right?
Well, again, first of all, my biggest thing was very against the social media when I was, a few years ago before I started doing this. So for the guys that are older like me, I would say, get on the horse, get on the wagon and start doing it. I've had so many guys that are still in that head of like, even they're looking at me. And I'm sure a lot of these guys are probably like, oh, there's Jay on Instagram again doing polyrhythm videos, and they poo it away and they don't see the value in it. But I'm getting students from all over the world doing it like this. And that's something I would never have been able to do if I was just doing it locally or if I was just gigging or, you don't reach as many people. So my advice for teachers, if they are looking to do this is to start, You got to start doing it. And I think for anybody that's in any kind of business for themselves, because if you're a musician, you're running your own business, so think of it as a business. Don't think of it as I'm just playing an instrument. And if you do that, you could actually start making a living at it. Musicians, I don't know if you know a lot of musicians, but we have a disease of undervaluing ourselves. Okay, we'll go out and we'll play a gig for 4 hours. That's 6 hours away for a slice of pizza and $50. That's not worth it. But a lot of guys will just do it because they're desperate for the work. They want to be able to work. So doing something like this, it gives you freedom to not be a sideman. Okay, I was a sideman for many. You know what a sideman is? When I say that, are you familiar with that?
Like not the main act of the show, almost.
Right. So a hired gun, basically. So you have an artist, record label signs an artist, and they hire a bunch of musicians. Those are all sidemen. Okay, even if I get into like a wedding gig, if it's not my gig, I'm a sideman in that project. You're just a hired gun that comes in and learns the part and does it. There's an agency in New York I used to play. I used to be a part of. I wasn't in any particular band, but they would call me when they needed a drummer last minute. And I'd have to go and just do a wedding. And I'd never met any of the guys. I don't know what we're playing. I don't know what the songs are. I don't know what's going to happen. I just show it with my gear and you go. And you just have to, you hope that the other guys are good and the communication is good. And sometimes it was magical and we'd have a great thing. Other times the band was a complete mess because the other guys didn't have it together. So you never knew what you were going to get. And that's a stressful place to be in, to go and have to perform in that kind of vibe. So again, a lot of musicians are trapped in that frame of just taking all these gigs, and there is a better way to do it. There's definitely a better way to do it. But you have to pay your dues. You have to put in the work. You have to go out and be willing to do this kind of stuff. And it's not easy for a lot of older guys like me that are doing it. Younger guys are great at it. Some of my mutuals and friends that are online, who are considerably younger than I am, who are doing it at a younger age. It's great, but I just came back from the NAMM show in January. Do you know what the NAMM show is?
Have
you ever
heard of it?
Probably
show me a clip, I would know what it is, but okay. No.
The National Association of Music Merchants. So basically it's all the gear that musicians use, every guitar, every keyboard, every microphone, every mixing board, every DAW software, every drum. All the companies are all there, and all the artists that endorse those companies are just walking around. So, I mean, you have every famous musician on the planet is walking around on the floor at this show. So you could just walk around and just run into, a famous guy. And it's like, oh my God, that's that's J.R. Robinson, who played drums on Michael Jackson's, Thriller album. Oh my God, that's Stevie Wonder. Like, oh my God, there's, and you just run into people. And it's eye-opening. But at that show, I met a lot of these young cats that are doing what I'm doing. And we all kind of like schooled together. Like we started walking around the floor, like this group of like 10 drummers that are doing the social media thing. One of them, my friend, Joe Lana, he's at the Cowboy Drummer on Instagram. I think he's on YouTube also. You should check him out. He does funny stuff. He just does very creative, really funny things with drums, like crazy, wacky, just fun things. He's a great player, but that's kind of his niche. His niche is like drums, but making it like almost comedy, and he does that. And everyone's got their own thing that they're doing. But one thing that we all have in common is that we're all doing it. We're all out there and we're all doing it, and we're making a living doing it. So I mean, it's a beautiful thing,
One thing I will say about you said before though, in the beginning of this about musicians undervaluing themselves, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of funny you say that, because that's what a lot of comedians do too.
Oh, yeah.
And now that I'm thinking about it, musicians and comedians are very similar in terms of their careers, right? Because their careers are based off of shows for the most part, right? I mean, yes, you can write certain things and you can do things differently, but if we're talking about stand-up comedy and performance-based music, it's more or less the same thing. You just have to do what you do well enough in enough bars until someone thinks, hey, this guy's really funny. Perform at this place.
Yeah.
Right.
A big break, man. Yeah. Getting a big break is a very rare occurrence. And you always hear about people getting their big break, but you got to remember, you're only seeing the winners. You're not seeing, for the one person that you see that wins, the Jerry Seinfeld, that won, There's 10,000 other Jerry Seinfelds that never got that break, that never got that opportunity, that did the bar gigs and did every club. I have teachers that I love dearly that are amazing drummers, every bit as good as some of the most famous drummers in the world. They just never got a break. And they're fine. They're happy. They're teaching. They're doing their thing, but they just never got that break. Then other guys I know that maybe aren't even as good did get the break. They did get lucky. They did get a gig and they did blow up, and it could happen, but it's very much a luck thing. And a lot of ducks have to fall in a row for you to get those kind of breaks. And that's another thing that's a misconception about the music business, is that, the breaks just kind of, they come rolling in. They don't, they generally don't, no matter how good you are, and then some guys that aren't that good get the break. And it happens. But, the only thing you could do is keep putting yourself in the situation, and then be prepared, be good enough that if there is someone in the audience, you're going to stand out. My band, in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we had a couple of opportunities like that, where if we were really on our A-tier game, there was that guy in the audience, but they passed a couple of times. And because it was like silly mistakes, it was like, instead of practicing, the guys were kind of goofing off or doing whatever. And then there was a lot of mistakes on the show and things like that. Or, it's very hard to get that break. It's not an easy thing, and not everybody gets it. So if you do get it, you got to really be grateful, but even if you don't get the break, you could still carve it out. You could, if you're dedicated to it. I have a friend who's a teacher of mine, who lives in Sarasota, Florida. And he's just like me. He's a hustler. And like me, he's not huge into the social media thing. And he's still kind of that mindset of not going all in on it. But man, he hustles. He's in the industry. He's in the back door of like all the big companies. He's in with all those people at NAMM. The companies paid for him to have a suite, and they paid for him to all his travel and all his meals. And he doesn't necessarily work directly with them, but just from being affiliated with them for years, he's worked up these relationships, and he makes a whole career just basically schmoozing. That's what he's done to get himself where he is. And that's how you did it back in the day. Before there was the internet, you would just go to things and you would schmooze, and you try to talk up everybody and try to, get yourself noticed, get yourself on a clinic tour, get yourself, signed to it with a big company. Get into a gig, do sideman work until one of your bands blew up. It's that's what you would do. And I have a couple of friends that did get on gigs that blew up. That's happened. So it does happen, but maybe 1% of all the people I know that's happened to. Everybody else is hustling, and doing their job. But yeah.
Well, you mentioned this a couple times, that you knew or you met some pretty big drummers and artists.
Sure.
Would you care to share with someone like the more known ones that you've met, or even still keep up with?
Well, so just from social media. So a couple of guys that in terms of social media has been crazy, because I've done a couple of videos. So I was doing a video where I do these weird intro count-ins to songs. I don't know if you ever saw any of those, but I did one on the song Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin, because it got a very deceptive intro that most people don't do it right. And I was just fooling around, and I did this video where I counted the intro wrong and then I counted it right, and it went viral. It completely blew up and exploded all over Instagram, and pretty much that one video grew like half my Instagram account. So it kind of exploded and blew up, and I was getting like follows from, like, John Stamos followed me, and the drummer from Def Leppard, Rick Allen, followed me, and all these celebrities. I'm looking at the time where the blue check mark meant something before they gave, now you could buy it. But I would look and I would see all these blue check mark people following me, and it was like really weird. And then one day I'm checking my emails, and I get an email from a guy, and he's like, "Hey, Jay, I found your email, and I'm a really big fan of some of your videos that you're doing, especially the counting ones. There's a couple of songs that I always had a trouble with, and I'm a guitar player, and I'd love you to check out these songs if you could, and signed Brian, Bry, it said." And I was like, "Oh, cool." So I look at his Gmail or whatever his email is, and it was Brian H. May. It said on the, so I wrote back, "Now, do you know who Brian May is? Like the famous guy, Brian May?"
I feel like I've definitely heard the name before. I'll look him up.
So he's the guitar player from Queen, the band Queen.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah, so I emailed him back, and I was like, oh, cool, man, and hey, I love your work with Queen, because I figured there's a million people named Brian May. It's just another guy that shares the same name, like LOL. I love your work with Queen, LOL. And I emailed him back, and and didn't think much of it. But then I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, so I went on Instagram. I went to Brian May's Instagram, his verified Instagram account. I went to his followers list, and I'm number one on his follower list, which means he just recently followed me. And he doesn't follow many people. He only follows 50 people or whatever. And I was like, oh, uh-oh. So I went back to my computer and I wrote back and I was like, hey, you're not the Brian May, are you? And all of a sudden I get an email back that says, it's actually Sir Brian May, because he was knighted by the Queen. Okay. But you could call me Sir Bry. And I almost friggin' lost my mind. I was like, oh my God, I'm talking with Brian May. This is Brian May. So I do the video for him. I do the song that he wanted me to analyze. I did it for him. And he sent me a voicemail. He actually sent me a 2-minute voicemail. Telling me all these stories of things. And he was so excited. And then when Queen came to the States, my mom's a huge Queen fan. She's loved Queen. Freddie Mercury died. She never got to see him live. It was like a big disappointment of hers. And so I wrote to Brian and I was like, hey, man, you're coming to the States if you're going to be on the East Coast. And he said, yeah, we're going to pick a date. You pick a date and I'll get you tickets. So we showed up and we were like 4th row center, and I got to see the show right there. I didn't get to meet him because of COVID. They were very strict on the COVID, even now, because God forbid he gets sick. It screws up the whole tour, but it would have been nice to have met him in person. But yeah, so that was a really cool one. So I'm kind of like, just from social media, become friends with that dude. And I've met so many drummers in the drum world. Guys that are like my heroes that you probably have never heard of, because they're like session drummers. The guys like Dave Weckl and Vinny Colaiuta, guys like that. These are guys that have played with jazz musicians, and Vinny was Sting's drummer for a while. He's played with everybody. These are guys that I kind of look up to. I did meet through social media, just talking back and forth. And Mike Portnoy is the drummer from Dream Theater. I don't know if you know who that is. At the NAMM show, I've run into a bunch of these guys and we've talked. This past NAMM show, I was sitting there talking with a guy, and we're at the Tama booth, and we're just talking and we're going back and forth. And at NAMM, you have a badge. Your badge has your name on it, so everyone knows who you're talking to. And I'm talking to this guy, and we're just talking. And I look down at his badge, and it said Derek Roddy. And Derek Roddy is probably one of the top metal drummers of all time, like ever. One of the guys that I used to use is when I teach metal to my students, I reference him. I'm like, yeah, well, check out Derek Roddy and check out this video of him doing this double bass drum technique. And here I didn't even recognize him. He's older than I remember him from his videos, because I'm looking at videos when he's like 20 and now he's like my age, and I look down and I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking to Derek Roddy right now. Like that's Derek Roddy. And, so a lot of stuff like that. As far as other guys that I'm friends with, I'm good friends with Ben Caesar, who's the drummer for Brad Paisley, who's a country artist. And he's had Brad's gig for, 20 years or something. So he's playing arenas and doing all that. He's one of those guys that I'm talking about. You get that break and you go out and you're doing that, which is awesome. He's a great drummer and a really good guy. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of drummers that I've met. I'm trying to think of anybody that you might know that comes to mind. But again, I don't know how into music you are. Who are some of your favorite musicians?
Well, when it comes to bands, and because musicians, I'm like all over the place. I listen to remixes, I listen to rap. Like it's so wide. But if we're talking bands, I'm a big and I'll just list a few bands and you'll understand, like Linkin Park, Foo Fighters, Nirvana.
Sure.
The classics. I'm trying to think. What nuts? It's the band that wrote Psychosocial. It's you know what I'm talking about? That the band, they all wear masks.
Is it not you're talking about Joey Jordison? Is that guy from
Let me look up the song. Psychosocial, Slipknot.
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 Woodson, yeah.
Yeah.
He unfortunately died years ago, but yeah. So Slipknot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get did you ever meet any of the band's members that I just named? Like
Yeah.
any of those types of bands?
I would love to meet Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl is definitely a bucket list drummer that I would love to hang. I want to hang out with that guy. That guy's just sounds like he's so much fun. But no, I've never met him. Joey Jordison passed away a couple of years ago. I've never met him. He's a little bit, again, he's a little bit younger than me. But we toured a little bit. A band I was in, we toured with Dave Matthews on like 6 or 7 dates. Do you know Dave Matthews Band? Are you familiar with them? So I did get to meet Carter Beauford, who's a big hero of mine, and I got to, sit down with him, and we spent like a good 15, 20 minutes just talking about drums. And then they gave me a headphone mix of Dave Matthews' actual in-ear monitors. And I sat like 3 feet behind the drum riser, about eye level with Carter's feet, and watched the whole show, like about as close as I am to the monitor right now. And that was a cool thing, because that guy is just a monster drummer. As far as like some of the metal, the guys that are into that, like Slipknot's more of a heavy thing. I've definitely met some of these guys that, like Mike Mangini. I've met. He was the drummer for Dream Theater. Now Portnoy is actually back. Trying to think who else have I met. I mean, I met guys like Steve Smith was the drummer from Journey. I've met. And he's also a very accomplished jazz fusion drummer as well. So, like Don't Stop Believin', that's him playing drums on that song. Let's see, who else have I met? Yeah, I'm trying to think of guys that you might know. But most of the guys that I try to go out and meet are like jazz cats or like fusion or session guys. I've never met guys like Steve Gadd. He's one of my heroes that I'd love to actually sit down with and ever meet and, do that. You probably don't know who he is, but there's a lot in the drumming world. There's a lot of these players that drummers know, and I'm kind of, those are my heroes. I've met these guys like Dave Weckl. I've met a couple of times. He was the drummer for Chicoria, who's a piano fusion jazz guy. If you're a drummer, you know who he is. If you're not a drummer, you probably never heard of him. But the only time I ever got starstruck was meeting Vinny. I met Vinny Colaiuta at NAMM. I ran into him. I wouldn't say I met him. I was like a 12-year-old girl. I turned around and he was like right in front of me, and I was like, and I totally got starstruck, and I fumbled over my words, and I don't know what I said, but it was kind of like, cool, man. And he walked away. And I was like, felt like such an idiot. But yeah.
Well, one of the more and I spoke about this last episode, which is people that I've had and I've like that I either have the contact information of or I've spoken to, that like it's usually social media people like my like generation find popular.
Sure.
Probably not anybody that you would know. But they're like people that have like agreed to doing the show and stuff like that. Now, actually, no, I'll tell you about this guy after the show, because I don't want to put him on the spot. I've never had contact with this person, but it was like a friend of a friend, whatever. That's a different story. But do you know who Jay Weinberg is?
I've heard the name. Yeah.
He's the new drummer for Slipknot. Jay Weinberg. Because
That's right.
Yeah. I just looked it up because Joey Jordison, you said, committed or died.
Yeah, I don't know if it was how he died. I'm not sure if it was a drug overdose or what happened, or I don't know what happened to him. But yeah, he died. He died. He was young too. He wasn't an old guy or anything. Right. That's why I know the.
Yeah. Did you know who was the drummer for Foo Fighters that not committed suicide, or that was a whole big investigation? He drug overdosed. Very recently.
Yeah. What's Taylor Hawkins you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Taylor, I've seen play a couple of times. I saw him play with Alanis Morissette. That was his first gig. That was his break gig. So he toured with Alanis Morissette in the 90s before he got Foo Fighters or any of those type of jobs. But Foo Fighters is what he was famous for. Yeah, that's such a shame. He was a really, really great drummer, and again, young guy. He was only a couple years older than me, and he had a kid. That sucks. And now they have Josh Freese, I think, is playing drums with them. Is kind of jumped in, which is an awesome gig. Man, to get that gig, that's got to be pretty cool. So
another thing I will say is actually about I was gonna say something. Completely slipped my mind. Okay, so you know what? Look, there was a guy I had on the podcast.
Yeah.
This is kind of relevant, kind of not, but he was telling me about how he had emails with the drummer of Halsey,
Oh,
right? And so this guy that I had on the podcast, he went on Bulgaria's Got Talent, right?
sure.
And it's the same thing as America's Got Talent, just in Bulgaria. And I was the first English interview that he had done. He has like 200,000 followers on Instagram, but I asked him, like, have you done other interviews? And he's like, yes, but they were all in Bulgarian. And they thought about it. And he's like, wait, this is the first English interview I've actually done. And I'm
Right.
like, oh, that's really cool. Because I guess he's fluent in both English and Bulgarian. But I was asking him about, I'm like, who have you met? Because I always like to ask, like, who have you met? Sort of thing. And just for the fun of it. And he was telling me, he's like, I haven't met this guy, but I had emails with the drummer of Halsey. I know a lot of bands here,
Sure.
stuff like that. But he said he's like sent over back when he first started, he sent over like 400 emails, right, to different drummers and management agencies to be like, could I, collaborate? What whatever. I
Yeah.
got one response, and that was from the drummer of Halsey, and that alone he was starstruck from,
Yeah.
and he's an awesome guy. He's only, I think, a couple years older than me too. But no, it's awesome though. You should.
Hustle. That's the hustle, man. That's, you go out and reach out and you never know. I mean, I reached out to Rick Beato, never expecting him to reply, and he replied and called me back, and it's like, you never know. Because, it's people are cool like that. Some people are just are great. And man, I got some great advice from Rick. Rick was like, Rick is a pretty heavy figure now in like the YouTube world as far as musician goes. I mean, he's gone to Congress a couple of times when they had talks about changing the legalities of what's happening with copywritten music and all the stuff, and how people are doing videos now, their music is getting taken down and videos are getting flagged. They've actually consulted him on what do we need to do to change these laws. So this guy is like, he's a pretty heavy cat when it comes down to that stuff. So I never expected in a million years that he was going to call me back, but I look at my phone and phone rings. It says Rick Beato because I saved his number, and I was like, oh my God, I was like, holy crap. And talking to him, his whole start on YouTube, just from being a producer, he knows all these famous guys. So his first few videos were bringing into his studio guys like Steve Vai, who was an 80s and guitar player, a very famous guitar player. And he did an interview with Steve, and then he did an interview with Dennis Chambers, and did an interview with some producers. And it's like, so yeah, his channel was blown up because he was kind of using the celebrity to kind of like fuel the views and
to funnel the views. Yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, that's the other thing. If you have an asset like that, exploit it, use it. People talk about like the girls that have their boobs out and they're doing all these things, and them playing guitar, but they're in these tight outfits and everything's all hanging out. And you get all these comments like, oh, put on some clothes and just show us you could play guitar. But you know what? There's a reason she got 4 million views, because she's got a great set of boobs. Use that. You only get one shot at life. If you have an asset like that, no pun intended, use it. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, go ahead and make it happen if that's what you got. So Rick said that. He's like, listen, when I do these what makes these song great videos, he's like, and I asked him, I said, how do you separate the tracks? Because like he was doing like a Alice in Chains song, and he's got it in the session, and he's like, listen to this tambourine that you don't even hear in the mix. He pulls everything down. You just hear the tambourine. Listen to this little guitar that they overdubbed. And he pulls everything down. You just hear the little guitar. And I'm like, you have to have the session to do that. Nowadays, they have software that AI pulls it all apart. But this was before all that. And I said, how do you do that, Rick? And he's like, I knew the producer. He's like, I know the guy that recorded that. He's like, and a lot of times they take the session home with them because they're working on it. And then at the end, when the album's released, they still have it. They keep all those, people that recorded the Beatles and recorded Zeppelin. These producers still have that session on, digitally backed up on their computers. He's like, so I could call this guy and I could be like, do you have the session to Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin? Oh yeah, you want me to send you the stems? And they send him all the individual microphones. So he gets the isolated guitar pack, the isolated vocals, the isolated drums, and he could remix it in his video. Most people did not have access to that. And so he was able to break it down, and he was able to use those contacts to kind of make those videos explode. And, you know, it worked for him. You know, I don't have those kind of assets that he's got, so I got to get more creative. But there's always ways to do it. You know, there's definitely always ways to do it.
Yeah, and you know, yeah, I forgot what I was gonna say. I was gonna say that, or yeah, actually, I do remember now. I was gonna say that, you know, I do appreciate you coming on the show, and you know, we've done the hour that,
Yeah.
you know, and I appreciate you coming on, and it was a really fun conversation. I'm gonna talk to you. I'm gonna stop the recording. We'll talk a little bit after the show. All right.
Very cool, man. Thank
All
you
right.
for having me. I appreciate it. And if I could plug, you know, I got my Study the Drums app. If anyone's looking to learn drums and do any of that, definitely check out the app. Study the Drums. It could be found in any of the app stores, the Apple Store, the Google Play Store. Yeah, and come take some drum lessons with me. Be great.
Maybe I will.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was fun having you on. I'll stop the recording. Any final words before we talk a little bit after the show?
so I want to thank you so much for having me, and I wish you the best of luck, man. You're doing it. You're doing a great job. So keep it up.
I appreciate that. All right.
All right.
In 3, 2, 1.